Welcome to the Billion Insight podcast. I am your host Sri, and we have an exciting episode for you. Today, our guest is Noah Healy, a highly experienced mathematician with expertise in computational math and algorithms. He is a game theorist, trained in nuclear engineering, and a market designer. He is a pending patent for his algorithm, which he believes will revolutionize the commodity market system, which currently reliant on outdated systems that involve many manual processes and intermediaries. His algorithm promises to transform the commodity marketplace into a radically more efficient system. Noah is also a big AI enthusiast, and he co-hosts an AI podcast called The Fourth Ace with the former CTO of the Reddit, Marty Weiner. We are excited to have Noah share his insights and experiences with us today. So, without further ado, let's get started. So, welcome, Noah. Welcome to the Billion Insight podcast. How are you?
Thanks, Shri. I'm doing pretty well today, and looking forward to this. Sounds great.
So, Noah, let's start with your childhood. You were born and raised in America, right?
Yeah. A town called Charlottesville, Virginia. This is pretty much famous for UVA, and so it's a known locale. This is the hometown of two early American presidents, Thomas Jefferson and James Monroe, famous for the Monroe Doctrine.
Hmm, interesting. If I'm not mistaken, you are in your 40s, right?
Yeah, late 40s.
So, you grew up in 1980s America, right?
Correct.
So, how is like growing up in America in 80s?
Well, I can't really speak to all of America. We've got big hunk of space. For
Yep.
me, growing up was pretty much, a sequence of finding interesting and fun things to do, punctuated by meals and sleep. So that was sort of what my life looked like. The Charlottesville at the time was still fairly rural to suburban rather than as urbanized as it is right now.
Mm,
So I spent a lot of time wandering around in
mhm,
large-ish, certainly for, 4 or 10-year-old tracts of undeveloped land. There's a little
mm,
transplanted bamboo that grew wild along the creek that ran behind my house. And there was a bamboo forest in my backyard. So, I started playing in that and then started playing along the creek in other bamboo forests as I grew up.
mm. So, when were you first introduced to a computer?
My first introduction to a computer was in school as part of an enrichment program that was being run in schools. And they were teaching us the programming language Logo,
Mm,
which was intentionally designed to interest students in computer technology. It's a graphical language in which you're giving instructions to a little triangle called the turtle and getting it to draw shapes and other types of things. I have to say that I didn't really take to it. A lot of pedagogy around computers was focused towards the creation of games or visual effects, and
mm,
that didn't interest me.
mm. When were you first introduced to the internet?
I believe that was actually well, no, we actually did see network connectivity at home. I don't know that I understood it as the internet, but my grandfather gave us an Apple II system,
Mm,
and we did actually learn about modems, and he had one on his IBM system,
mm,
and so I knew that the internet existed that way. But
mm,
in terms of my use of the internet, I'd say in my first full year as a student at UVA, they had actually bought open computer labs for the undergraduate students for the first time in their history as an institution that same year. And they were very impressed that the systems were loaded up with Archie, very early, not even web browser, but interface, and couldn't get enough of telling us about it. And again, I wasn't terribly impressed because
mm,
again, the things that they were doing there weren't the sorts of things that I found to be interesting.
mm. So Noah, how did you first become interested in mathematics?
Pretty much exposure. I found mathematical relationships very easy to acquire and visualize, and I
Hmm.
found that those sorts of structures and the fact that they replicate to be pretty much endlessly fascinating. So arithmetic and then ultimately algebra and calculus were my best subjects in school and were things that I was interested in. Geometry was also pretty awesome.
Hmm. So how has mathematics changed over the years? And what were the trends do you see, especially in this era of generative AI and advanced computing?
Math has actually been changing very rapidly over the last several centuries with the simultaneous introduction by Newton and Leibniz of calculus. Very powerful and practical new applications of mathematics were introduced by using this concept that Newton, I believe, referred to as infinitesimals, which were a very bizarre concept. It was a number that was so small that you could treat it like it was zero for all purposes except division, where it still worked and you were allowed to do that. This launched century-long projects to try to figure out a way to explain how calculus works that's actually rigorous. And that led to other projects to make other parts of mathematics rigorous, and the discovery that in many cases, what was actually going on was much more complicated and interesting. During the 20th century, group theory managed to be pretty much completely described. And that was an enormous effort by a lot of mathematicians. Right now, there's something called the Langlands Project, which is sort of building bridges and demonstrating that ultimately, if they manage to actually get that far, or if we, the human species, manage to get that far, that
Hmm.
ultimately every corner and approach to mathematics are deeply connected to each other. And so the discovery of these far-flung connections and the accelerated discovery of these far-flung connections is something that's really become quite a big deal. At the same time, with computers, we've seen computer-driven proofs that were never previously possible. So there's the first one of these was something called the four-color theorem. So if you take a sheet of paper and
Mhm.
divide it up into regions like a map or just any random regions you choose, and you start coloring each region with the rule that any two regions that share a non-point border have to have different colors. So, for example, like a checkerboard, it would be a legal coloration because the same colors only meet at corners.
Hmm.
It can be shown that you can never need more than four colors to complete a full coloring of any regional map. But a proof of this fact was something that humans didn't produce. What we did was programmed a computer to check the hundreds of special cases and demonstrate that colorings exist for every single one of them, and then had it churn out thousands of pages of proof that was the case. And there are now computer proofs that are so large that it would not be possible within the confines of a human consciousness to read the whole thing. If you were to take a newborn baby and teach them to read with the proof and have them be highly healthy and live the longest that any human being has ever lived, they
Hmm.
would die before before finishing reading the proof. And so there's lively debate about what the status, proofed or not, of
Mhm.
things that are produced in such ways. There was an extra twist of the knife not too far back. It was earlier this year, I believe.
Mhm.
Google's Deep Alpha team released a project they called Alpha Geometry that was using generative AI to come up with approaches. So in mathematics, there's the mechanics of actually working through an idea. So if you're, say, multiplying a couple of 40-digit numbers together, that's something that children can do. It's just work to actually work through 40-digit multiplication, and a human being may well make a mistake. Computers, of course, can do this quite easily, generally speaking. So that's sort of the work. But then there's an approach where you might be able to have an insight about what sort of actions you should undertake to solve a problem that might be much more efficient or much less efficient. And so a lot of what the great mathematicians did was generate these new approaches that we can now sort of learn and try to recognize how to apply, or if we're very lucky, come up with new approaches ourselves. So they were using generative AIs to generate these approaches and then turning those over to these proof assistance systems that we have to grind through the work of the generative AI approach and see if that actually resulted in solving mathematical Olympiad problems. And they got a performance that was pretty close to as good as the peak human performance on that test subject. So it is known, there are mathematical proofs about this, that certain kinds of mathematical reasoning is beyond what computers can do in general. But there's a sort of probabilistic counter. One of my old engineering professors used to say that the physicists and the mathematicians proving that something was impossible was sort of just as satisfying as proving that something was possible. But for the engineers, knowing that something's impossible is just the starting gate, because we need to make whatever is happening. And so if it's impossible, we have to come up with like a cheat that actually works. And there's bizarre space of probabilistic solutions that have been demonstrated to be operating really close to as well as humans can. And certainly better than virtually every human. Bear in mind that the top performers on the Olympiad are pretty much the top performers that humanity can produce. So, when this thing's operating just within the boundary, it's operating at about 97% of like the smartest person that there is. It's operating at about 108% of the second smartest person there is. So it's doing really well.
So there is a perception that if you are good at math, then naturally if you play chess, then you also can be good at chess. I mean, do you like to play chess?
I have played chess. It's not a serious interest of mine, but if I'm in a location where chess players are congregating, I can and will play with them. My skill level is nothing to write home about. I'm sort of decent club playerish, and I've picked up some chess philosophy and strategy, largely, I would say, out of an interest in the approaches that have been developed around game AI and learning some of the principles, both to be able to understand the game AI better, but also to understand some of the things that came out of game AI. There was a reasonably extensive period that seems to have largely faded due to the health of the people that were carrying it out, where some masters and even some grandmasters were publicly exploring the games that were being produced by these new super chess engines, particularly the ones based on the neural net probability of winning approaches, and discovering new strategic ideas and principles in the game of chess that were unknown. And my understanding is that these notions and ideas are now quite common at the top level of play. So I am aware, for example, that India now has its second player ever as a candidate in the upcoming World Championship, and also that the man in question is the youngest person to ever qualify for a World Championship game. So that's some sort of trivial knowledge, I suppose, that I happen to have sort of ancillarily.
What's the fun fact about mathematics that you think most people don't know?
Well, my guess is that people don't know virtually every fun fact about mathematics, because it's such a large topic and one that isn't really treated with with the fascination that I really think it deserves. I think one fun fact about mathematics is that there are problems that have existed for centuries or even thousands of years that are simple to state and easy to understand that we don't know how to solve at all. Like absolutely no progress, or virtually no progress. There was a case that made a bit of a splash, for example. So there is a proof by Euclid, which we're talking about a couple thousand years at this point,
Mm-hmm.
that there are not a finite number of prime numbers. Um,
Yeah.
that any finite number that you choose to describe for the primes, you can demonstrate that there have to be more primes than that. There's also this phenomenon called twin primes, where numbers like 11 and 13, 29 and 31, you have two prime numbers that happen to be different by 2. And so if you look at the distribution of primes, they fade out, and they fade out at a particularly sort of slow pace. If you look at the twin primes, they fade out, and they fade out more quickly, but it's a similar-ish slow pace. It's sort of the slow pace to the slow pace, if you will. So the question existed even in those days: are there an infinite number of these, or do they eventually fade out to nothing? And it was a little over a decade ago, like I think 15-ish years at this point, where a guy proved not that there were an infinite number of twin primes, but there were an infinite number of primes that were, I believe it was 21 million apart, which doesn't sound like that impressive, except that basically every intelligent person who'd ever lived had worked on this problem, and none of them had made any progress at all. So he took the number from infinity down to 21 million, and further work on his approach, and he's also done a few other things. I believe the number is now down to something like 8 or maybe 12. For some reason, 8 and 12 stick together in my brain, but the number is quite tight. That hasn't actually been proved yet. But another one, the Collatz conjecture, it's not quite as old as this, but it's another one that's very simple to state. So the Collatz conjecture involves doing a recursive procedure, that is a function whose output is then put back into itself. And the function is a fairly simple one. If you have an odd number, you multiply by 3 and add 1, and if you have an even number, you divide by 2. So even numbers produce smaller outputs, odd numbers produce larger outputs. And if you think about what happens if you hand the number 1 to this, 1 times 3 equals 4, 4 divided by 2 is 2, 2 divided by 2 is 1, you have a loop. So there's this stable loop from 1 to 4 to 2 to 1 to 4 to 2 to 1 embedded in the Collatz conjecture. And every number that we've ever tested, and we've tested a lot of numbers, although because of the way numbers work, no matter how big a number you choose, you've basically tested none of them. Every number we've ever checked falls into this particular loop. So the question is, does every number fall into this loop? And nobody knows. Nobody's even come up with any approaches. There was a person that made a brief splash, I want to say maybe 12-ish years ago, who had anonymously posted a thing that he claimed to be a proof, but it turned out to not really hold up to rigor. There are several insanely intelligent working mathematicians today that describe the Collatz conjecture as sort of a hobby problem, something that they let themselves have as a treat, but they can't dedicate their lives to it because they just have no idea at all. And one of them, Terence Tao, who maybe the strongest living mathematician, did come up with some ideas that were new, at least, but hasn't come anywhere close to cracking this thing. And it's very interesting what's going on with iterated functions. What can they do? What can't they do? That's something that would be very important for us to understand. I have one that I play around with having to do with geometric multiplication and symbolic multiplication. So most people learn symbolic multiplication in school. You can take a couple of numbers. If somebody asks you what 7 times 8 is, you've memorized 56. If you've got multi-digits, you know how to sort of create the wedding cake or whatever they called it and do that. There's more efficient ways to perform that multiplication, and computers, particularly computer programs multiplying very, very large numbers, use these more efficient methods to make the system go faster. But geometrically, we can also multiply numbers. If you have a defined unit line segment, and you create a triangle that has one leg of that unit line segment and the second leg of length of whatever it is that you're interested in, one of the two numbers you're multiplying, and then you draw a similar triangle starting from the same angle as the unit leg and extend out the length of the second number that you're interested in drawing, and then match the angle and converge this new triangle's second leg line with the former triangle's third leg line. When you form that third triangle, the length of the second leg of that triangle will be the length in your unitary line of the multiplication of the two numbers that you had. And we have a proof that the symbolic multiplication ideal algorithm that we have is the fastest way to multiply two numbers. But the procedure I just laid out for doing it geometrically is I believe actually algorithmically faster than the proved fastest possible way to do it symbolically. And so attempting to understand and resolve this is a problem that I am playing around with.
Yeah. So, Noah, what advice do you have for young people who are interested in pursuing a career in mathematics?
Well, careers in mathematics are something that aren't necessarily the same as the study of mathematics themselves. So the general career advice, I think, is going to help you out a lot there. But the math is going to have to actually be interesting to you. So discover within yourself whether or not you're actually passionate and interested in solving these problems. If you're going to make it your career, I made it my hobby, and then it became my career.
Yeah. So, what is like to work as a game theorist? And could you explain what game theory is for those who don't know what it is?
Sure. So game theory is the mathematics of strategy. And strategy isn't what people generally expect it to be. So chess, for example, isn't particularly a game of strategy. It is a game of tactics. The tactics are very complicated and very deep. And generally, we use the word strategy to describe tactics as they become more complex and deep. But what strategy actually is navigating the interests of the various players of a game. So chess is a very basic strategic situation. You want to win, and your opponent also wants to win. So strategically, chess and checkers and tic-tac-toe are effectively all the same game. The difficulty is simply choosing which tactical approach will help you or hurt you the most/least. So doing game theory is about working out what the actual interests at play are and figuring out what the co-interested outcomes that are possible or desirable are, and how to change what tactical choices are available to make those outcomes probable.
It's interesting. So you are basically develop the brain of that game, some strategical game, just like you mentioned chess. There is just so many strategical game out there, like Dota.
Yeah, that's an option. So, for example, let's talk about the marketplace. A marketplace is a forum for buyers and sellers to come together, and buyers want to buy the thing that's in the name, but they don't want to spend any money, right? They'd much rather get what they're getting for very little money. And sellers want to sell the thing. Again, it's in the name, but they want to sell for lots of money. So in one sense, they have this cooperative interest. They want a deal to happen. But in another sense, they have a competitive interest. One wants the price to be very high, the other one wants the price to be very low.
Yeah.
So how do we arrange a marketplace so that the two sides come together around a common price, and actually get what they both want, versus a marketplace that does not correlate around common prices, where the trades don't happen?
So that will be designed based on the demand and supply, right?
That, yeah, supply and demand is a natural phenomenon, and particularly if you put your engineering hat on, you really want to account for and utilize real things. If you're doing an engineering design and you're not accounting for friction or gravity, that bridge is going to collapse really quickly. So you really want to take into account things like supply and demand that are real and natural.
Okay, so game theory is not just only limited to the games, it is also applicable to any other field.
It was actually developed extensively to help define America's nuclear strategy during the Cold War. And that actually led to an odd wrinkle, another one of those fun mathematical facts, where many of the fundamental theorems of game theory were actually classified, and many of them remain classified. They're referred to the folk theorems. And while you can prove them yourself, the sort of official proof publications aren't actually public, because the U.S. chose not to allow that to happen.
I have been a game developer, but I'm not that familiar with this mathematical theory, game theory.
Yeah, well, as I was saying earlier, I was never that interested in game development, and
Yeah.
game theory is a little misnamed because there are some game theoretic ideas that appear within in the kinds of video game software games that are
Yeah.
popular, and it can help. The two things are not terribly connected. Most video games involve very clear goals, and don't have much in the way of interactive interests. So in most games, you want to kill all of the enemy or sneak into a room or whatever it is. You have a very clear goal. There aren't really other agents that have complicated goals. There might be
Yeah.
guards that want to stop you from doing what you're doing, but there
Mhm.
aren't people that I am unaware of games where, say, you're a secret agent
Mhm.
and you're going into a party, and that party has other secret agents that have independent agendas,
Mm.
and whether or not those agendas happen is ancillary to whether or not you have things happen. There are games, things like Half-Life, I
Yeah.
think, have complex and rich environments and different ways of sort of impacting the world, but it's all still very player directed and focused. Places where game theoretic outcomes happen would be
Mhm.
in things like massively multiplayer online
Yeah.
games where the agendas come from other human beings, not
Mm.
artificial beings within the games.
Yeah. How has your nuclear engineering education influenced your current work?
Well, my nuclear engineering education actually got me into using computers to solve math problems,
Mm.
and also introduced me to a wide variety of mathematical techniques that I use for data analysis and other similar things. It also got me thinking about systems in a what I think of as a very productive way. And so that allows me to analyze things like markets, which are agglomerations of large numbers of human beings with their own agendas and their own hopes and fears and souls and everything, in a fashion that is very non-standard, which allows me to sort of pick them apart and then put them back together in ways that are more efficient. And that
Mm.
approach is something that I picked up during training for nuclear engineering.
Mhm. So you are a market designer. Can you tell us what is market designer is?
Well, sadly, it's basically me. The marketplace design that we presently use has been tweaked here and there, and there's a rich academic discipline in tweaking called marketplace microstructure design. But the economics profession assumes that the fundamental market design that we currently use is perfect. And if all human beings had infinite computational capacity and time was objective, they would be correct. Unfortunately, both of those things are false. So they are actually wrong. And so what marketplace design is about is coming up with a way where people with their own agendas, which might be selfish, might be selfless, whatever, but people with their own agendas can come together and achieve that cooperative state that I was talking about before, where in spite of the fact that they might have a desire that could break the cooperation, they will be able to act in their own interests to act in the common interest.
Mhm. You can design any marketplace, be it Amazon marketplace, it's a debt marketplace, share market, crypto marketplace. It could be anything, right? Where people buy
Uh,
stuff, someone has to sell something.
yes, yes. So my design works for any market where the buyers and sellers are different groups of people, and the product involved is of reasonably uniform quality. So um, a recirculating market where I buy something from you so I can sell it back to you later, so you can buy it back from me, so you can sell it back to me later. That kind of thing, it's not very appropriate for that. And a market in, say, one-off works of art, it's not very appropriate for that either, because you paint something and then that's for sale and then it's done and it's been sold, and then I paint something and that's for sale, and there's no continuity. But for lots of things, food, construction equipment, energy, uh, we've got this commodification, and so and we've got people that make it and other people that use it, and so it works for all of those situations.
So coming to your patent, you have designed an algorithm that you claim could revolutionize the commodity market once implemented. So let's understand a few things here. In the Billion Insight podcast, we break complex things into easily digestible insights. So could you please explain us two things here? First, what is the commodity market is? And second is, what are the current issue with the market that you want to solve with your algorithm?
So commodity markets are markets that of the character that I just described. They're situations where the product has been fully defined on quality. So it's like a boxcar full of wheat or coal or wool or something like that. And the quality level is such that boxcar A and boxcar B are functionally indistinguishable. So if you've got a wheat farm and I've got a wheat farm, we can both sell into this marketplace and we're both selling the same product. And if you've got a factory and I've got a factory, we can both buy these things of wool and we're getting the same product. So it doesn't matter who the buyer is, and it doesn't matter matters what the price and amounts that people actually want. And so that very much simplifies the problem down to what price would fetch the most deals. And so I came up with this two-step marketplace where people come together for a bilateral collective negotiation on the price, and then we measure how well people were doing on that by having people voluntarily choose to trade or not trade at the collective price negotiated. And then the trades that occur trickle back through and pay off the people that provided the information that allowed those trades to occur. So the entire system is quite transparent. It isn't particularly computationally difficult to carry out these actions, and it doesn't cost as much money as the system that we presently.
So the algorithm will replace the current system? I mean, it will replace the traditional system of commodity market.
Yes. So a marketplace that uses this algorithm would need to be established, and then people could choose to use the existing market and basically get less for what they're selling, pay more for what they're buying, take greater risks with their money for lesser returns, or They could go into the CDM market where they're getting paid more for what they make, they're paying less for what they receive, they're putting less money at risk, and they're getting more money back for the money that they put at risk. And so people that are interested in being wealthier and more stable will switch, and people who are interested in being less wealthy and more unstable will not switch, and those people will go out of business, and then you'll just have the people that are in business that are in the CDM.
Why only commodity market, not any other market like debt market, even crypto market?
So many crypto products are in fact commodities themselves. So
Right.
the markets that we use to trade crypto and stocks and bonds were all originally developed as commodity marketplaces that we
Mhm.
then adapted financial instruments into. These are things. Now, many crypto systems actually intend to recirculate their currencies, and consequently that doesn't meet one of the critical criterion. But there are two crypto projects currently trying to get off the ground that intend to incorporate my technology. So that's a possibility, and one that I'm fine with, basically.
Interesting. So, Noah, can you explain your algorithm with an analogy for those who are wondering how exactly it can help the commodity market? Could you explain us a little
Sure.
bit? Yeah.
Well, so the first thing, I'm going to tell you a story about something called the wisdom of crowds. So
Mm,
there's this English guy who was very interested in sociology, and he was at a county fair a little over 100 years ago,
mm,
and they had a contest where people were guessing the weight of a bull, and the
mm,
prize was the bull. Whoever got the closest guess to the weight of the bull
mm,
would actually get the animal. So the after the contest was over, he asked for and got all of the slips and then charted out what the distribution of guesses was. And his hypothesis was that the guesses would be pretty wildly inaccurate. Um, and what he discovered is that the guesses did have a it wasn't a normal distribution. It was sort of a long tail distribution. But the median of the guesses was actually better than the winning guess. The median of the guesses, I believe, was off by about a third of a pound. And this is an adult bull. This is, you know, an animal that weighs in excess of 1,000 pounds. So that's pretty darn accurate. Um, and so he started looking for other opportunities. Other people have looked for other opportunities since then. And it's been
mm,
discovered that, in point of fact, if you get people and ask them about a numerical fact, the median of their guesses will cluster around the reality with very high precision.
mm,
And so what I'm exploiting is asking the people in the marketplace to ask them what the market price is going to turn out to be.
mm,
And the fun thing about this is that not only will their median guesses tend to cluster around the right answer, but their median guesses are actually the definition of what the market price actually is, because the market price is the price where half of the people want to half the product wants to buy and half the product wants to sell, or you know, half the interest in buying, half the interest in selling, and so all buy and all sell interest is satisfied. So we have two different systems of median, one of a sort of psychological human nature thing that's heavily replicated, and the other one an actual just fact about how supply and demand works, and so on. So
mm,
we have
mm,
this negotiation market where
mm,
people are attempting to guess what the median of all price interest is and is going to
mm,
be today and tomorrow and next week and next year. And so we integrate all those beliefs together and sort of create a path of where the market thinks it's heading.
mm,
And then we have a clearinghouse of buyers and sellers that can take these prices and just say, that price looks good to me. This is how much I'm willing to sell. Or that price looks good to me. This is how much I'm willing to buy. And the system will clear the aggregate selling and buying interests together and make those deals, charge off a fee, take that fee, spread it out
mm,
among the speculators based on how accurate they were. So in addition to just, you know, guessing off the top of your head, the better you are. It's like the bull. The better you are, the more you get back. And so this system creates a stable set of incentives for every person acting in their own interest to produce a functioning, transparent price discovery and exchange.
Interesting. I will attach all the link of Noah's algorithm in the description. You can check out there. So Noah, you filed a patent for your algorithm. So can you share your experience of filing a patent? How easy or difficult was the process?
For me, it was very difficult. So the first thing to know about patents, and this is true for the United States specifically, but I believe that this is actually true in general around the world because there's been a lot of normalization. You are not allowed to patent public information. So if somebody out there invents a new kind of chair or new kind of computer chip or new kind of potato chip, and they tell everybody about it and they publish it in the local paper and they get a ticker tape parade, it's over. Can't patent it anymore. It's public information. So if you have an idea that you think you could or should patent, shut up about it. Because if you tell people, it's over.
You shouldn't
So
vocal about it.
yeah. So that's the first thing. I filed a provisional patent. I wanted to get some attorney help, but part of getting an attorney to help you is that you have to be able to explain it to them. Now, explaining something to an attorney-client privilege, that is not the same as publicizing the information, but you still have to be able to find people who can understand what you're talking about. And the more esoteric what you're working on is, the less likely you're going to be to find somebody that you can work with. And so it was a long and arduous process just to find an attorney in order to get the patent filed. And I was on the clock because when you file the provisional patent, you only have 1 year to file the full patent. And we got it in, I think, with about 3 or 4 days to spare from my initial patent filing. Once you do that, they assign the patent to an examiner, and the examiner, gets it on their docket, learns, reads, tries to understand, and then comes up with whatever they come up with. Generally, they come up with some objections for the first draft, and that process can take quite a while. In the sector of patents that I am pursuing, the wait time from assignment to first office action is 32 months. And that's how long it took for me, and the assignment time was 6 months, so it was a little over 3 years before we heard back. As I said, typically their first response is negative. They're gonna try to find how to pick it apart. Their job isn't to just rubber stamp every crazy idea that comes across their desk. Their idea is to actually dig in. There are a few basic responses, according to my attorneys, that are fairly standard. One is prior art. You aren't allowed to patent things that are public. So whether it's public because it's already been patented or it's public because it's just public, if they can find something out in the world or in the patent office that resembles what you're talking about, they're going to toss that over the net and say, hey, what do you think about this? Did somebody else already think of this? And then the other axis they're going to go after, and this is something your attorneys can help you out with a lot, is whether or not it meets one of the criteria for patented information for a patentable system. This is a much bigger deal for software patents or systems patents, and the words are sort of constantly changing, like I'm dealing with. If somebody out there is trying to patent some physical object, that's pretty patentable, assuming you can get past the prior art problems. So they came up with some things that they wanted explanations why this prior art didn't invalidate my patent, and I was able to do that. It was a lot of work. One of those patents was, I think, something like 700 or 800 pages long, but there was a very clear mathematical argument why what they were talking about belonged to a different category of infinity than what I was talking about, and so the two things had nothing to do with one another. And so We went through that process. I was given a notice of acceptance. So that's kind of, you apply, you get assigned, the person you're assigned accepts it. You can then take that acceptance and, the thing that they actually accepted, go back to the patent office and then apply for the patent, and you're done. At that point they're supposed to give you the patent. They did not give me the patent at that point. We asked them about that. They'd given us some vague warnings that this might happen. They said they hadn't figured out why they weren't doing it yet. They'd get back to us. They did get back to us, and they had some problems. The biggie was that they claimed that the patent was useless. And so I had to teach my attorneys the basics of algorithmic analysis and explain how having a better algorithm actually means that you're using less time, less energy, less physical, properties of a system in order to achieve an outcome. And so a couple calendar years later, they accepted that they didn't want to defend the proposition that 1 equals 0 in court. And so they gave me a second notice of acceptance, which they then withdrew 3 weeks later on orders from people that they're not allowed to talk about and whom they claim that they disagree with, and who they further claim they can't clearly understand. But the objection that presently exists, which is what they say is the best that they could understand, is that if this patent were to be granted, I would control the economy of the United States of America.
Whoa.
That's an overstatement. Even if I were to have monopoly access to the price discovery mechanism that became the dominant commodity marketplace of this country and quite probably the world. Retail exchange like Amazon, service exchanges like Google's ad markets, the existing stock markets and currency markets, none of those things would be affected in any way. So huge amounts of the economy would fall outside of the patent. But as they said, they disagree with and this both in content and in sense. It's just that they don't understand what they were saying, and this is the best they could do. My attorneys filed for an appeal, and I opened up with a case with my congressional office to try to investigate what's going on, see if we can get more information. The patent office stonewalled my congressional office. Also, it lied to them, and so that didn't turn up anything of use. But the appeal is live. In July of 2023, they scheduled the appeal to be heard in July of 2025. So a year from now, I will get my first day in court, and we'll see whether or not they can put together an argument that is logically coherent, or they're going to do something else, because they've been doing a lot of something else so far.
So when did you file the patent in the first place? I mean, which year?
So the provisional went in June of 2015, and the full patent application went in on June of 2016.
Yes, it's already like 9 years.
Yep, my first acceptance was in September of 2019. The patent application went in December of that year, and it wasn't until sort of spring the following year that they got around to explaining why they were ignoring their own procedures. It took a couple months to explain to my attorneys just how ridiculously egregious their behavior was, and we put together they put together a very, very sharply worded objection. February 2021, I was given a notice of acceptance again, and then March of 2021, that acceptance was rejected. I opened up the case with my congressional office in, I think, June of that year, and it took until August, which is, again, that's the most delay that they'd ever seen out of the bureaucracy on any issue. It was sort of the most brief and dismissive description. It was simply, they gave me the time, they gave them the timeline I just gave you, except they left out the first notice of acceptance. They just lied about the fact that they had accepted it twice, and then broken their procedures by ignoring the first one. But yeah, they're not wrong. This is incredibly economically significant, and I'm a logician. I'm a computational logician. They don't have a leg to stand on. If they did, I'd have found that, and I probably wouldn't have bothered trying to do this work. If it was possible to have a logical objection to this thing, I'd
Mm,
have found it and saved myself the trouble.
mm,
So I can't I can't know ahead of time what
mm,
sort of gibberish people will have to produce to object, but I can prove that if you're objecting, then you have made a logical error, and I will probably be able to find it and demonstrate that you have spoken gibberish.
mm.
And that's what's happening to the people that are objecting so far.
Even I have heard that you started a chain towards a petition to urge the authorities to take swift action towards your pending patent.
Yes,
Yes.
right.
Yeah.
So that was I was on a podcast in I think January,
Mm-hmm.
and they suggested actually having a call to action.
Mm-hmm.
So I put a petition together. I
Yeah.
just recently got my 200th signature,
Mm,
which
yeah.
is one of their sort of official goals. So that's encouraging. I've got 300 to go before I get to Change.org's next
Mm,
tier of achievement. But yes, for those that have any sympathy for me or any interest themselves in having access to an economy in the future, it's on change.org under CDM_patent. And if you can put your name down, that would be absolutely amazing, frankly. I don't know how many signatures would actually have to get on that thing before
mm,
institutions like the US government would care. But if anybody makes that go viral and
yeah.
we get large numbers, I'm certain that there is a number that would cause the US government to start to care.
Yep, yep, yep. Absolutely. I'm really a hope, man, that you will get your patent approved soon. So, when you filed the patent in 2015, have you thought that it could lead to this much of time?
I've been surprised at many turns about just how much difficulty is involved.
Mm,
I'm particularly been disturbed by how reluctant people are to make large amounts of money or do things that are disruptive. There's a pretty common story that goes around, particularly in the tech field, that tech is sort of hyper obsessed and focused on making billions of dollars and is interested in changing the world. And my fairly extensive meetings with VCs and other deep pocketed players, I met nobody that didn't say that those were both turnoffs, that both the intention to make large amounts of money and the intention to change the world, either of those things was a deal breaker. I also have been somewhat dismayed by the fairly low level of mathematical sophistication, the leaders in the financial community. I don't know if you've ever seen there's a movie that called Margin Call, or I don't know if I've got the right one, but there's a movie that had Kevin Spacey
mhm. Yep.
and that there's sort of a critical turning point where the big boss finally shows up,
Mm,
and he's got a very great monologue. It's Jeremy Irons, and he's like, "Explain it to me as you would a young child, or perhaps a
mm,
golden retriever. I
mhm.
assure to you, it's not brains that got me to this position."
And please, speak as you might to a young child or a golden retriever. It wasn't brains that got me here, I can assure you of that.
Well, I have not spoken to all of the people that are in those positions, but I've spoken to maybe a dozen-ish at this point, and I have
Mm,
to say that that's a very accurate portrayal of the way that they portray themselves. And so those things have been much more of a stroll than I expected. There's also a great deal of simmering animosity towards the system as it presently exists. The number one and frequently the only reason that any user I've ever interviewed
mhm,
has for using the systems that currently exist is lack of choice.
mm,
Um, it's their living. They have to use it. There's no other thing that exists, so they use the only choice they have,
mm,
and they hate the people that operate it, and would in many cases happily watch them be killed. It's
mm, mm,
very
mm.
unpleasant all the way around, basically.
So, Noah, if the patent is approved, what next? Do you think they will implement it right away soon after the patent is granted? Or do you think that you have to convince them once again, this time to implement it?
Yeah, it is still a struggle. Patent is less about some sort of free win to the end zone. It's more about having another tool. So without a patent, certain kinds of intellectual property rights do not exist. And so what
Oh.
I have is my ideas and my work, and I need to be able to leverage those things into the wherewithal to get marketplaces set up that use this technology. The patent would make those ideas and that work more powerful, but there's still the leveraging process. And so it would be helpful, but it's not the case that if, somebody heard this message and, put the word down to the US Patent Office that they need to stop acting like morons and just hand it over, that within 24 hours there would be a completely functioning alternate economy on the planet that could start attracting new users. It would just be a new tool in that struggle. I think it would be a big and useful weapon, but the dragon's not going to slay itself.
Okay, so just for understanding, have you approached any third-party entities like Robinhood?
So I have approached dozens of companies around the world. And as I said, 4 projects that are trying to launch with the technology engaged. I have had well over 1,000 conversations with people in order to find the dozens of companies I've actually been able to make connections with. There is extreme reluctance within the financial community to do anything that makes large amounts of money, which, as I said, that was a very shocking revelation. And also very strong reluctance to innovate in any serious way. And so that's the wall I keep running into. But at the same time, the financial system is creaking very badly, and nobody's more aware of this than the insiders are. And so my competitive markets are going to keep failing in ways that are worse and worse and more obvious. So the longer this goes on, the wall's cracking from both sides.
People like Sam Bankman are responsible for making this process worse.
Yeah. The amount of criminality that exists within the marketplaces has always been shocking, but it is now both public and shocking, and that's not helping the reputations of people that weren't really any good in the first place.
So Noah, what kind of AI tools you use every day in your life?
Well, I don't really use them every day. We use the generative AIs to summarize our podcast from the transcripts, and there's some AI supports that go into those pieces. My interest is, as I said, more on the computational side of mathematics, and so that mostly involves thinking through those kinds of problems.
You have your own podcast related to AI called The Fourth Year with the former Reddit CTO. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so Marty and I have a common interest in thinking through and exploring the potential impacts of AI. Marty is more interested in generative. I'm more interested in reinforcement approaches. He's more interested in consciousness. I'm more interested in superintelligence. And so it's conversations between the two of us, as well as the occasional interview.
Interesting. Let's talk about the AI implementation in the market. How is the situation with AI in there?
So AI has been used in our current markets for decades now. Depending on how one defines AI, even if you're using the most restrictive definition of sort of modern neural net self-teaching systems, those have a pedigree of at least 2 decades within the market and potentially more. If all you mean by artificial intelligence is computer-generated signaling decision-making, which is a perfectly valid description, then that goes back around half a century at this point. So we've been plugging AIs into our marketplaces for, depending on how you think about it, 25 to 50 years. Our markets actually don't function very well with AIs plugged into them, which is why globally we've been seeing increasingly frequent serious crises occurring, and we will keep seeing increasingly frequently serious crises as long as we have access to AI technology and we're using the markets that we're using. One of the motives for exploring the mathematics that my market is actually based on was creating systems that we could plug AIs into that would help us. And my marketplace, there's excellent reason to believe that my market could allow us to utilize artificial intelligence in ways that are economically viable and actually helpful to human beings in general. And so that's I see that as really the important part of what I'm working on.
Hmm. Do you see people who are into AI getting an unfair advantage in the market? Because AI can analyze a vast amount of data at the speed far beyond the human capabilities. It can identify the patterns, you know? So you
Oh, well,
see,
so
yeah.
that isn't even controversial.
Mm,
So the two groups that are most publicly utilizing AI are a relatively obscure firm called Renaissance Technologies, which has an announced ROI of something like 40 or 50%
mm,
annualized over the course of multiple decades, which is something that far beyond anything that I've ever seen before.
mm,
And the other one is BlackRock,
mm.
which is the world's largest asset management
Yeah.
firm. And they have a system called Aladdin that has been using reinforcement technology since the aughts at the very least
Mm,
to guide trading strategy for their
mm,
company. So if you are not exploiting AI to destroy the human economy, then you are not fulfilling your fiduciary responsibilities as a financial professional in the
mm.
markets today.
I mean, it is very difficult to regulate the industry from AI, because you can't stop people from using AI tool. So according to you,
That
what?
well,
Yeah,
sorry, but yeah, that's exactly why regulation actually isn't a feasible approach.
yeah,
You actually have to create
yeah.
stable market structure, and that's where game theory and all the rest of the stuff I've actually done comes
Mm,
in generating a system that when the agents within the system are behaving selfishly, the system works better.
mm, mm, mm,
Because if you can't demonstrate that that's what happens, then
mm,
AIs will be developed to break that system for the profit of the individual.
mm, mm. So, Noah, what do you think about quantum computers?
I think they're an interesting technological exploration that is very far from any practical application right
Mm.
now, are also an interesting programming challenge.
So, what do you think? What is the use case of quantum computer will be? I mean, people are saying that once the quantum computer became mainstream, they will break all sort of internet encryption and nothing will be safe from it.
So that is rooted in the fact that there's this thing called Shor's algorithm, which allows
Mm,
for much more efficient factorization than any other approach that we're aware of.
mm,
And there are very important cryptographic protocols that
mm,
depend for their security on the current difficulty of
mm,
factorization. So ubiquitous quantum machines would mean that Shor's algorithm would allow those things to be cracked. Lots and lots of stuff has been done and is being done.
mm,
There is work in developing new cryptographic algorithms that aren't dependent on that particular problem being hard. There is no quantum algorithms that we presently know that magically solve
mm,
these other protocols. So we could get past that. The most useful potential problem that quantum computers could solve for us is simulating quantum systems, which could allow for considerable advances in the state of the art of engineering quantum systems, which would, of course, include quantum computers.
mm. So, Noah, can you explain what quantum computer and its related term superposition is for those who are not familiar with it? Can you
Well,
explain?
yeah, I can sort of try. You put your finger right on the most important thing. Our understanding of physical reality is that when we measure some quantity of a system, that's the only time in which that system actually relevantly has that quality or quantity.
Mm,
And when the system isn't being measured, it's in this state called superposition, where it has the potential to be in multiple measurements. For those curious about just how spooky and weird this is, there's this thing called Bell's inequality, which recently got a Nobel Prize, which explains what's going on. So to put this in a nutshell that people can sort of understand, if you have a polarized lens, like in sunglasses, that will get rid of all light that passes through it that doesn't match the polarization of the lens. If you have a second polarized lens that's at right angles to the first one, that will effectively be a perfect filter. Those two lenses put together will create a black that will stop all light passing through. But if you put a polarized lens between those two lenses that isn't at a 90-degree angle to either of them, the first one, we would think, sort of the way we think about things, is that you would filter out all but one direction, and then every other direction would actually filter out everything that's left because it's some other direction than the one that exists. But what actually happens is that by choosing one direction, you've actually created a superposition of many directions that only doesn't include the 90-degree angle. And so the intermediary angle will have some things, and when that measurement happens, only the 90-degree angle to that new measurement will now be eliminated. So the 90-degree angle to the first measurement will be back on the rotation. So when you go through the third lens at a 90-degree angle, some of the light will get through there. And so that means that because physical matter and energy has this property of being able to behave in multiple states simultaneously, we can compute using and exploiting that multi-state system to effectively carry out parallel activity on many different potential inputs all at the same time.
That's interesting and fascinating. So, Noah, can you compare quantum computers with traditional computers in layman's terms?
The difference is considerable because whereas with an existing computer, the basic problem is to figure out what sequence of operations that you want to perform on a data set that you have available to produce the output that you're looking for. With a quantum computer, in addition to solving that problem, you also have to solve the problem of measuring the right output. So if you create a system that just sort of creates every possible state in the universe and then does whatever you want and then measures at the end, you could get any one of an infinite number of answers, only a few of which you might actually be interested in. So you have to think through the consequences and make it so that the stuff you're not interested in all manages to cancel out the way those 90-degree angles canceled out in the case of the polarizing filters.
People are talking about the AGI, artificial general intelligence, but once quantum computers become mainstream and are combined with the AI, it will become ASI, artificial super intelligence. So what's your thought on this?
That's a very popular theory. I see superintelligence as something that we have had with us for quite some time. Markets used to behave in a way that was super intelligent before we started plugging machines into them and destroying their capacity to function. Specific super intelligent machines have existed for quite some time. Algorithms were developed during the Second World War to do scheduling and logistics far better than any human beings had ever done them before. There was also work done at Los Alamos to design the explosive wave fronts of the atomic bomb and advanced knowledge of liquid engineering in ways that were super intelligent. Of course, very classically, chess is a game that we have not solved, but we as human beings certainly cannot play at a high level. The machines now play what high level chess is. So I maintain that superintelligence is something that is among us. General intelligence, There are those who argue that quantum effects are in fact necessary for general intelligence. That's he's got the Nobel Prize, and Roger Penrose. He claims that not merely quantum mechanics, but in fact quantum gravity is foundationally necessary for sort of general intelligence / consciousness. I don't really know one way or another on that subject. I don't really think that the modern natural language processing is necessarily on the path to artificial general intelligence, but whether quantum or not is critical to the discovery of that, should it be discoverable. I'm yet agnostic on it. As I said, the Alpha Geometry project, combining a generative approach system with a proof engine, has created something that solves geometry problems, which is a very general field in general, and does so at a level that is pretty close to superhuman. It's super, all but one of us, basically. So I'm not unsure that we would see artificial general intelligences coming out through some more hybridized approaches without the necessity of quantum mechanics or quantum processing being a critical component.
So what do you think? How far we are from seeing a mainstream quantum computer?
I'd say we're pretty far away from that. The quantum computers and the approaches to quantum computers that presently exist mostly require liquid helium level cooling. Liquid helium is extraordinarily dangerous stuff. I've played around with liquid nitrogen. I've held liquid nitrogen in my hand. Liquid nitrogen absolutely can be dangerous, but it is night and day. A liquid helium dewar, if mishandled, turns into a bomb almost instantaneously. And without solving those fairly considerable technological problems, getting them out of the lab is unlikely. There are some light-based approaches that only require liquid nitrogen levels of cooling, but they have some other issues. That's very interesting. However, liquid nitrogen itself, as relatively safe, is still an extremely dangerous product, and generating liquid nitrogen isn't cheap or safe or easy, and so having a home appliance effectively that is continuously producing liquid nitrogen so that your computer works, that's not something that's going to happen soon.
Okay, so they are putting liquid helium because of the excessive heat generated through the uses of the quantum computer, right? In order to make that cool, make that system cool. So that's why they're using the liquid helium.
You're right. So the issue is that in quantum systems, every single time particles interact, they entangle. And what a quantum computer is about is controlling and maintaining entanglement in the precise way that the programmer desires. And so every particle in the system needs to be constrained. And the easiest way to constrain particles is to cool them down so they don't move around very much. And so the quantum systems that exist, the ones that are claimed to produce supremacy and are doing these impressive things, are being cooled down to very, very close to absolute zero. And they're maintaining their computational state for not even a second in at this point. So, think about using your computer. Think about it's only useful for less than a second, and it's only useful when it's hooked up to a pot that contains stuff that, if it's exposed to atmosphere, it will explode.
So apart from the other factors, it is one of the big factors we need to solve before the quantum computer becomes mainstream, right?
I would say that barring some very different sort of approach, that's going to be the order of operations.
So Noah, we are on the final segment of our podcast that is called rapid fire. We often call it instant insights. I will fire off a quick question to you and you have to respond as fast as you can.
I'll give it my best.
Yeah. So are you ready?
Yep.
Coffee or tea?
Tea, I suppose, if I have to.
Cats or dogs?
Dogs.
Beach or mountains?
Mountains.
City or countryside?
Countryside.
Early bird or night owl?
Both.
Hmm.
Today, for example, I woke up at 6 o'clock after going to bed at 1:30 in the morning.
Hmm. Favorite book? Could be anything.
It couldn't be anything, but it could be a lot of things. I guess I'll go with The Shockwave Rider by John Brunner.
Hmm. Favorite movie?
Star Wars.
Dislike book?
Robinson Crusoe.
Dislike movie?
Oh, The Day of the Locust.
Favorite mathematician? Living or dead?
Uh, Newton.
Best president of United States?
Washington.
Most challenging part of your job?
Communication.
Most rewarding part of your job?
Uh, well, I know that I'm fulfilling my purpose, so that's
Hmm.
very rewarding.
One thing you can't live without?
Well, at higher levels of the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, I need a mathematical conundrum to be chewing on.
Fame or money?
Money.
Future technology you are most excited about?
Um, Computers. I think we should definitely start using these things now that we have them.
Computer is already here. I said the future technology that is not here yet.
I contend that while we have computers, we have not yet started using computers.
So you are saying that we are not using computers in its full potential.
Yeah. I mean, basically, the only highly developed portion of computer technology in the
Mhm.
general economy is games. So things like CDM, for example, completely
Mhm.
revolutionizing the financial system would be a use of computers. The
Mhm.
use of more generally intelligent AIs to change how manufacturing works with 3D printing and self-assembly 3D printing would be using computers, something we don't do yet, and so on.
So you are saying that though we have computers, only a few things like games are taking the full advantage of their capabilities. There are many other things that we can definitely leverage for our benefit.
Yeah. We aren't psychologically or sociologically presently set up to exploit these
Mhm.
machines, and I think we are going to have to be.
That is an interesting perspective. Self-driving cars or flying cars?
Well, flying cars exist right now. Self-driving cars don't exist right now.
It do exist in certain rudimentary stage, but it exists.
Uh, I mean, flying cars are cooler. I'd go with flying cars.
Okay. Bitcoin or Ethereum?
Oh, neither. Serious technological and sociological problems with both of those protocols.
Stocks or derivatives?
Ooh, neither again. There's also serious technological and sociological problems with both of those protocols, but between the two, if forced, I guess I'd go stocks because CDM
Hmm.
eliminates derivatives.
Hmm. Mac or Windows or Linux?
Linux.
So your daily is Linux?
Yeah, I'm talking to you on a Linux laptop right now.
Which distro you are using?
Ubuntu,
Hmm.
easy to get access to.
Hmm. Android or iOS? I guess it must be Android.
Uh, Neither. I don't own a smartphone.
Really?
Yeah,
That's interesting. VR or AR?
I had fun in VR back in the 90s.
Hmm.
AR is very creepy. I'll go with VR.
Hmm. According to you, the popular website that you think should not exist.
Most of them, Facebook definitely.
Optimization or simulation?
Optimization is a lot more in my line.
Quantum computing or classical computing?
Classical computing. We have it, and we expect to continue to have it.
Blockchain or traditional database?
Oh, traditional database, certainly.
Machine learning or deep learning?
Deep learning.
If you had to choose one programming language for life, what would it be?
Lisp.
Lisp programming language?
Yeah, LISP, sometimes referred to as list processing. Many
Hmm.
different flavors exist.
Hmm.
Generated by accident by a guy named John McCarthy, who was writing a
Hmm.
paper on a new protocol for writing math papers. And then some of his students used that protocol to write an interpreter for it. And it became the most
Hmm.
powerful and one of the more popular programming languages.
Okay, it is like object oriented?
Oh no, no. It's way better than that. It's a functional language that is heavily based on the lambda calculus.
Hmm. So are you using the Lisp programming language to create your own algorithm?
So in fact, the open sourced version that's up on GitHub,
Hmm.
which was written at my direction by a friend of mine, is implemented in a language called Clojure, Clojure,
Hmm.
which is a Lisp that runs on the Java virtual machine.
Hmm. So you are using the fork version of the Lisp.
Yeah, there's Lisps all over the place. My
Hmm.
my go-to text editor is called Emacs, which is actually written largely in its own version of Lisp called eLisp, and the editor contains an interpreter for that language, so that you can write eLisp programs inside your text editor to edit your text for you.
Hmm. Okay, so that's the end of the rapid fire. So Noha, what do you hope to achieve in the next few years in your field?
Well, I hope that the patent actually comes through. I hope that some of these projects that presently exist come through.
Hmm.
And I hope that I'll be able to find and start other projects that advance, and that CDM finds that fallow ground to break it out of the seed and into the sunlight,
Hmm.
and repair the financial system.
Hmm. Okay, so one last question. So what is the best piece of advice you have ever received?
Ooh, stick to your principles. That's a good one, but maybe point of view is worth 70 IQ points.
Hmm.
If you find the right approach, hard problems become very, very easy.
Yep, yep. So Noha, that's the end of the podcast. Any final thought?
I'm afraid not. That was very thorough. I think you're doing a great job.
Thank you. I hope that you enjoyed the podcast.
I did. I did. It was a lot of fun. It's just
Yeah.
I don't know what else I could possibly add. Hello, everyone. If you're on YouTube, please subscribe to Shree's podcast, The Billion Insights. If you're listening on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, please take a moment to rate us 5 stars if you enjoyed our conversation.
Thank you, Noha. Thank you so much for sharing your incredible insight and experience with us today. We wish you all the best.
Absolutely.
And our listener, if you want to know more about Noah and his work, all the links can be found in the description. See you next time on the Billion Insight Podcast. Until next time, dream big and work hard. This is Sri, your host, signing out. Peace